and we're going to talk about forgiveness. Because John Gottman, one of the things he identified was that for people to have really good relationships, they're really good at forgiving things. We have to make a lot of good statements to solidify our relationships. We have to have a lot of positive statements to each other. We also need to be really good at being careful of negative statements, because negative statements have so much weight. Kids have additional ideas of what forgiveness is, and that's where it's going to get much more interesting. For instance, forgiveness is not equal to forgetting. Now, kids want you to forget. The second they have apologized, they want it to be struck from the record. They want it to be struck from their memory. And that has to do with their theory of mind a little bit. We've talked about by 5, it's interesting that they both happen at the same time. By the age of 5, kids have theory of mind and kids can forgive. But kids are very egocentric. So even though they have some idea of what you're thinking, a vague notion, they're assuming you're thinking pretty much what they're thinking. So if they're like, okay, I did something wrong, but now it's over and I'm done with it and I've forgotten it, why aren't you thinking the same way I'm thinking? It doesn't make sense to them. We have a nice saying. When you're looking at a wrong, it's good now and then to look back over your shoulder, but it's not good to stare. I don't want you to forget when you have forgiven things, but it's not good to carry around a file cabinet. Does everybody know somebody like that? Forgiveness does not equal trust. This is a much more complex thing for kids to understand. Forgiveness does not equal reconciliation. Reconciliation, the word reconciliation is actually a bigger word than forgiveness. Reconciliation is equal to forgiveness plus trust. The idea that you can forgive somebody but not trust them is actually a really useful concept. How do you feel when you've apologized? That's also really important. Teaching your kids how to apologize well. An apology, just as I encouraged people last time to be very specific and precise with their kids, when you give them praise, it has to be labeled. Good job for taking the food back into the kitchen. But your apology should always be very specific. When your kid says, sorry, that's not a real apology. Don't accept unacceptable behavior like that. Sorry for what? Forgiveness is essential for relationships. It makes kids feel safe. If you do not forgive your kids in a reasonable amount of time, they are not going to feel safe in that relationship. It lets them know you're always going to be there for them. It reinforces attachment. Little kids, they see things as opposed to getting the gist of them. They see things purely. They see things for what they are. They see things, we call it in the medical field, we say they see things concretely. They don't get the gist of things. All of that happens over the next 26 years. And beyond. Our brains are fantastically plastic, but in the early years, our brains are really plastic. And we say plastic because we mean they're very malleable. Reinforcement and punishment. Let's start there. Every time I say the word reinforcement, I mean you're increasing a behavior. Reinforce a bridge. When you are reinforcing the troops, you're increasing something. When I say you're reinforcing a behavior, you're increasing the behavior. When you're punishing a behavior, you're trying to reduce the behavior. Coach is trying to help you become a better version of yourself. You don't have to be perfect to be a coach. The coaches at tennis, they're not better than the tennis players, but they can still coach them because you have the skills we've been talking about. What is the evidence? What are the big myths about siblings? Does order mean anything? Nothing. No one has any definitive study that order means anything. The guess is it's what we're putting into it. It's all projection. Also, does it matter if you're an only child? No. They learn their relationship skills from their peers and then they bring them back home. That the highest predictor that you get along with your sibling is the quality of the relationship you have with your best friend outside of the home. It's all about fairness. It's about property. 80% of the time in these studies, they're finding that kids are fighting over property. And so now, as good coaches, something you should always be thinking about when you're entering into your kid having a conflict, whether it's a conflict with you or with your spouse or whoever, is what object are they fighting about? They're fighting about an object until I prove otherwise. Kids are very interested in fairness, but they have very skewed ideas of what is fair. There is no equality. We learned in this country, separate is not equal. So there's no equality, but what you can use, the word is, I try to use unique, right? You say, I treat everyone uniquely. It can't be fair. Fair by 5, you can start, but it's very dependent on the kid. But by 5, kids have an idea that if I have 2, that other person should get 2, even though I don't want to give them 2. You want to be very careful about comparisons. Comparisons, and they talked a lot about this in Sibling with Rivalry really well. Comparisons are out the window. Ever comparing your children is very complicated. Let's say your kids get into a fight, or you see your kids in a fight. Our tendency most of the time is to rush up to the child who did something wrong and deal with them first by punishing. That's actually the wrong way to do it, right? When you punish the child who's doing something wrong first, you're actually giving them a positive reinforcement. You're telling them that they are getting the attention first. You actually deal with the injured one, you draw away from the one who did something wrong, and you said, I'll get back to you, in that stony, cold, icy way that lets them know there's going to be a consequence. Kids are deeply sensitive to comparison, and that gets back to that fairness concept. When you're a coach and you're moving in, you're going to observe. You're going to observe what the danger signs are. You're going to say, what is going on here? If there's escalation, or they're using a lot of invalidation, meaning really bad words, words that you don't want to become a habit, that's when you decide that it's time to intervene. Then you have to use your judgment. You have to say, okay, how am I going to positively reinforce the good things going on and avoid positively reinforcing the negative behaviors? When you want to teach about escalation or invalidation, you can come into the situation and say, I see a lot of escalation going on. You don't have to blame one of them to start off with. If you want to start off dealing with the conflict well, you just want to start off by observing. You want to do a lot of reflection at first. Make sure that both sides are heard. Even though you're sure you know one of them did something terribly wrong, you want to let both of them feel heard. Then you're going to go into the judging and internally. And then you're going to try to go into the guiding. The guiding is where you get to do a lot of I wonder statements. You can coach your children into having positive moments. That's what you're doing when you're helping them play together. You get to teach your kids forgiveness. You get to teach your kids how to have better conflict, how to have better relationships, better than maybe some of us had. Thanks so much for coming out.